And thank you for joining us. On behalf of Uber Ether, Ping Identity, SailPoint, CyberArk, Radiant Logic, and Carahsoft, I would love to welcome you to today's webcast, IAM Advantage, best-in-class solution to accelerate and enhance government security. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Please note that all of your lines have been muted to reduce any background noise, and please direct all of your questions to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to answer all of your questions at the end of the presentation, and if for some reason we do not get to your question, our team at Carahsoft will follow up with you after offline. This webcast is being recorded and a link will be sent out in a follow-up email for you to view it again or share it with a colleague. We are pleased to offer one continuing professional education or CPE credit to those that attend today's webinar. In order to qualify for the credit, you must be present, registering your attendance by signing in with your full name and actively participating in the polling questions throughout the entirety of the webinar. For more information on the CPE credits we are offering, our CPE sponsor NASBA, and the submission process, please click the link on your screen. And if you meet all of today's requirements, you'll receive your certificate of completion within 2 weeks. Before I get to introduce today's speaker panel, I'd like to tell you just a little bit about Carahsoft. So Carahsoft is the trusted government IT solutions provider, a top GSA schedule holder, supporting an ecosystem of manufacturers, resellers, integrators, and consulting partners committed to serving the public sector. The dedicated cybersecurity and defense team here at Carahsoft specializes in providing federal, state, local, and education customers with a variety of cybersecurity solutions to secure their cyber ecosystem. Our contact information will be at the end of this presentation, so please don't hesitate to contact us for any of your needs. And at this time, I'd love to introduce our exciting panel for today. We have Matt Topper, President at Uber Ether, Frank Briguglio, Federal CTO at SailPoint, Brian Rosensteel, Federal CTO at Ping Identity, Wade Ellery, Field CTO and Senior Technical Evangelist at Radiant Logic, and James Amanian, Senior Director, U.S. Federal Technology Office at CyberArk. Matt, the floor is all yours. Matt, you got to come off mute.
Yeah, I'm going to just hit the quick share button real quick here. Hopefully everyone's good to go seeing that. So want to chat a little bit today about IAM Advantage and what the 4 vendors here and Uber Ether have come together to build for the federal government. So with me here today, so I'm Matt Topper, President of Uber Ether. As Payne kind of ran through us all already, Wade Ellery with Radiant Logic, Frank Briguglio with SailPoint, Brian Rosensteel with Ping, and James Amanian with CyberArk. The interesting thing here is we've had 5 people, and across us, there's over 100 combined years of trying to tackle the federal identity problem. And when we started on this journey about 2 years ago, this team was my crew. This was the team, right? Call us the grinders, right? The trusted group of people that have been trying to solve this, not the pretty suits that show up and put together PowerPoint presentations, the team members that got down in the weeds. And when customers had problems, right, we always got together and solved them and figured out what the best solution was, right? We weren't always the front men for it. We were the ones that made sure at the end of the day, the customers were successful. So why did we go down this path? Right, we've all been doing this for a long time. Frank and I used to work together in a previous place. Wade and I have worked together for over a decade. But when we get together at conferences, when we got together after events, you look at 100 years of experience across us and go, well, what makes you guys experts? Like, you've obviously failed. You don't know what you're doing. And we would ask each other, why is this so hard? Why are these implementations struggling? We've seen these work extremely well together, right? Each one of our companies have our best of breed, our best way of doing these things, but when they get to the customers, a lot of times doesn't always finish the way it should. So, and at the same time, we continue to see, and everyone that knows me knows I hate these, I call them the scare slides of, right, the statistics, but it's not getting better, right? Over the last 20 years, we see more and more of the breaches, whether it's the first breach compromising username and password, or API tokens, or, right, you get in a different way, but the first pivot is to AD and going after the privileged access. Like, it's not getting better. And we're at a point in the government where it has to, or else we're going to have some continue to have major issues on our hands. And we know our customers are constantly under the microscope, right? A lot of times we talk about the human, right, PEs, right, person entities, and then kind of put non-person entities on the side and hope to get there someday. But all of our organizations, there's more NPEs than there are humans at this point. And the amount of federation, right, this is just getting more and more complex, trying to do the identity programs. And then even within the programs, right, there's a lot of tools, a lot of capabilities, but every 2 to 3 years, you see your application service has to get rebuilt because of configuration drift. You see, right, not always all of the same CA certificates loaded on all the servers. So when you go to authenticate, it works one time, but then you come back and hit another machine in the cluster and it fails. And right, these are things that we can't keep repeating anymore. And we owe our customers within our agencies a better way to do it. So what IAM Advantage became is really all of us coming together with our best practices, making sure that what we build fits the customers the best, is tailored for the federal government, is tailored for the FAR clauses, right? The use cases we know hit over and over again, and making sure those integrations happen between that. When the new patch comes in, a new upgrade comes in, new capability, a new feature, customers can just use it on day one. So as we go through today, each one of the team members is going to talk about why they're the best at what they are as part of IAM Advantage and the value they deliver as part of their product offerings. But please ask questions as we go through. We're here to help, and we just want to see this successful because we're at a point where we can't keep delaying, and we've got to get that value in everyone's hands as quickly as possible. So, and when we asked ourselves the question, the problem was it became a choose your own adventure. We could sell the best products, we could build the best demos, but a lot of times when it went into customer agencies, depending on the integrator you picked, depending on who you had internally, their experience, where they came from in the past, what they had seen, not all the paths were always the right ones. And we hate to say it, but there are also incentives for some organizations to make sure that they put more people on rather than getting this done fast and efficient. And because of that variability, a lot of times the customers didn't see the value. So as I said, we picked a prescriptive path, but one that we have seen over and over again be successful in our most successful customers individually. So with how we fix this, we came together, and this is, for those of you that are familiar, idmanagement.gov, their chart for what a healthy identity and access management program looks like. So as you can see, not every vendor fits in every row, right? We had to bring together different pieces from different vendors to make this a full picture, right? On the bottom, you can see OpenSearch, which allows us to do all of the aggregation of the logs, the audit events, the authentication events, the authorization events, the provisioning. When Active Directory has someone added into a group, right, we're able to pull up that AD log and then check back and send it to SailPoint and go, hey, just making sure you did that and it wasn't someone else in your real time, right? Closing that full, really what we've talked about is the kill chain forever. But so I'm going to turn this over to Wade and let him start walking through exactly what Radiant allows us to do and some of the tremendous value it brings, And then we'll kind of build up this picture as we go today. And then at the end, I'll show you exactly how we deploy this and help make you successful. So we're going on our journey. We're gonna go through aggregating the data. Wade's gonna turn it over to Frank, talking about governance. Brian's gonna talk about enterprise protection with phishing resistant credentials, federated access, contextual access. Obviously, across the board here, there's a ton of changes coming to 863, 53, the new 217 that kind of affects everything on here. And then James will wrap up with defend. So not just everyone coming through the front door, the citizens, how we protect some of the most secret or most critical pieces, secrets management, privileged users, which is where agencies get themselves in trouble as people start moving laterally. So with that, I will shut up and turn over to Wade.
Thank you, Matt, and I appreciate the introduction and definitely the work you've done to bring us all together. As you've said, this is a group that was worked together in multiple scenarios, multiple customer projects for decades now. And the opportunity to really start to bring all of our best practices to one place and deliver that as a complete solution is a really powerful step forward. So appreciate that extremely well, and also everyone else in this group. So you mentioned we're going on a journey and we're building this stack, and you start the stack with a foundation, and this is where Radiant Logic plays. We're the guys down in the concrete with the big boots on and the gloves doing the nasty, dirty work of connecting to everything, making sure the data is available, and understanding how that information works together. And when I want to expand the conversation of identity, as you did a little bit earlier, in the federal space, NPE is a common term. In the commercial side, people don't necessarily recognize it the same, but we have to start thinking about identity as being more than just people. It is applications, it is services, it is privileged accounts, it's bots, it's other systems around the environment, it's machines. There's a lot of objects out there with attributes that need access to resources, and those need to be managed. Those need to be included in this family that we're adopting and taking care of here. So in the space that Radiant Logic plays in, we are first basically designed to gather up this information, to understand that all this data is scattered across the environment. It's in different protocols, structures, schemas, systems. You need to be able to have a common place to bring that together. And that's been coined the master user record, the entitlement catalog, the identity data warehouse, the policy information point. It's basically saying, let's bring everything together and then make it available to everybody that needs to use that information and how they need to use it. If you want to go to the next slide. There you go. So key to this is not just aggregating data together, not just putting everything in one giant meta directory, which never worked. It's being able to understand that information lives in different systems with different labels, with different formats. And I need to build a comprehensive view that makes sense to the applications like SailPoint and Ping and CyberArk. They're going to act on this information. They need to understand and recognize this data as being both accurate and reasonable to what they're trying to do, and in a format and a structure and a schema that they can really consume. So the functions inside Radiant aren't just connecting to the data, but being able to give you down to the attribute level, the ability to control what the information looks like, be able to validate the quality of the data on the backend systems, the ability to bring that data forward and stage that information so that it can be consumed by the applications as it's needed, and also at the same time recognizing change in real time. We're making authorization decisions based on information that comes out of Radiant. That information needs to be accurate to the second or millisecond. So when something changes, it has to be reflected immediately through the system so that Ping and CyberArk are making decisions that are actually really relevant to the data in the moment. And if you want to go to the next slide. There we go. So the key here is, now I've aggregated this data and I've gathered together all this disparate information. I've done work on transforming and normalizing and aggregating and correlating and building common identifiers across all these systems. And this is all a mouse-driven point-and-click solution inside Radiant. We're not asking you to bring in months and months of developers to code all this. This is something you can do right out of the box with the product. But then I have to make this information available, because the fact that it's in Radiant alone is of little value unless we can share it. But each application on the endpoint, each point like SailPoint or Ping or CyberArk or any other consuming application, has a particular set of information that it needs to see, a particular way it wants to see it, in a particular format and schema and structure. The wonder of Radiant is now I can create multiple views of the data. The same core information is the source, but I can present it in a view that is specific to the needs of each endpoint application. So when that application queries Radiant Logic for the data, or we push that data over, it's just the information they need to see. It's exactly the way they expect to see it. They can consume it very quickly and very easily. And again, when something changes on a source of truth, we can ripple that change through so that the endpoints consuming this data are consuming the most accurate information available. So the intent here is build this once and then use it across the organization. And it's critical that you're making your decisions at each point in the stack above us on the same information. If SailPoint's working on one set of data and Ping's working on another, all the policies in SailPoint aren't actually actively governing the actions inside Ping effectively. You need to have the same data available everywhere. So Radiant Logic is this foundational layer, handles that problem of where is all my identity data, how do I use it, how do I access it, and then hands it over to the layers above us that use that to do the work that you see today. I'll hand this over to Frank in that very same model, and let Frank talk about what they can do with that particular information after this poll question.
Sorry about that. Sometimes the wrong key gets in and you got to start all over. First poll question before we drop it to Frank. How does Uber Ether's IAM Advantage solution handles scalability for growing organizations? So I think we're working through it, and we'll let people have a chance to answer. So Frank, if you want to kind of carry through, and we'll revisit that as soon as you finish between you and Brian.
Absolutely, Matt, and thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Good? Yep, good. First off, I'd like to thank Matt and Uber Ether and our industry partners, Carahsoft, Ping, CyberArk, Radiant Logic, for having us today. This is a huge conversation that we're having. I know Matt doesn't like the statistics and scaring folks. I agree with that, but let's be realistic. We're all under attack. It does not matter where you live. It doesn't matter what type of agency you have. The attack might be from the inside or from the out. So we hear things like zero trust. We hear things like modern security architecture. So how are we building that foundation? And Wade alluded to it. We're building this foundation of identity profile data, and then we're using it further down the line. So as Wade explained, they're going to build this identity profile data. SailPoint's going to consume that. Now, it might be data that SailPoint traditionally consumes by themselves, right? We can absolutely do that. But as Wade says, they present the data in a different way, right? In a usable way. So it makes that configuration steps a lot more efficient. So that is absolutely an option. Going back to, kind of Matt's ICAM definition, I'm going to take that a little deeper for a second and say, the definition of ICAM truly is it's a set of tools, policies, and systems that an agency uses. I'm reading this because I thought it was important to get the definition, right? That an agency uses to enable the right individual to access the right resource at the right time for the right reason in support of federal business objectives, right? This community has been talking about that for years. So as we build that stack, you see where SailPoint fits in this equation. I will say, SailPoint alone is not ICAM, right? There's no single vendor that is all of ICAM, and if they are, they're not doing a very good job at it. I'm gonna be, just blunt. The converged stacks are a great idea, but they don't do everything. They do bits and pieces very well, and that's how you get 100 years of experience on a panel like this with vendors that have thousands of customers across the globe solving these problems today. So we provide the life cycle automation and control of how a user gets access. So what you're going to hear Brian talk about is from, a different perspective of access than what you're going to hear James talk about. James is going to be very prescriptive and talk about the privileged user. Brian's coming at access from a different perspective. This is exactly what we're talking about. How do we build that model layer underneath what the goals of the privileged access management solution is, or the web access management, or federation, or all the things that Ping brings to the table. So we're building these controls in place, and it really forces us to do it right. The data accuracy, the data complexity, all needs to be aligned. So when you look at these capabilities that SailPoint is bringing to the table, the automated provisioning, the triggering of workflows, all that's data driven, as Wade said, based on the identity profile. That triggers an account creation. It might create an entitlement request or an access provisioning. Any of these things need to be governed. We all live in a very highly regulated industry. We have controls, we have guidance from all over the place, and we're audited. So as easy as we make the security, we can also make the compliance to satisfy those two worlds. So with that, I'm going to turn it back, because really there's not a lot more to say than, we're providing the governance and control for all of your access, whether it's cloud, infrastructure, ERP, doesn't matter. This is where control starts. And on to enforcement.
So before we turn over to Brian and the Ping team, hey, I liked all those the answers to the poll questions. It seems like people understand it. Right. While we have the best of breed vendors today here on the phone that is the tightest integration for this platform we have, you also, everyone in the audience understands that we understand you've made existing investments in identity, and your choices might not directly align with all the 4 vendors we have here today. But the way we've built it is modular, and you can bring in other vendors to work with this. You can say, hey, our hardest problem right now might be access management, because we have to go to citizen-facing, phishing-resistant credentials, and we just don't have a way to do that today. And then in the future, we know we're going to have to do a better job to do management of federated users coming in that build up virtual organizations for information sharing and add SailPoint to that. And then, we've got to expose internal capabilities to some of those federated partners where they need administrative rights onto machines to be able to get access and govern their own data that they're providing us. And that goes over to the privilege side. So great answers from everyone. I love it. So Brian, I'll turn it back to you.
Hey, thanks, Matt. And I'll echo, it's always a great time when we can get, everyone together to really talk about the combined solution for ICAM, identity, credential, and access management. It's not any one thing. I think for the longest time, and this goes back to when I was trying to explain when we were doing derived credentials initially, and we'll talk about why derived credential adoption hasn't been very strong, and some of the lessons learned that we've had from that. But it came down to when people talked about identity, they really equated identity to the person behind the keyboard. And, oh, well, I have this credential and that tells me who the identity is. And so often I had to explain identity is really more than that. And Frank, you gave the definition for identity, and I love that definition, right? The tools, policies, and systems working together that, enable the right individual to have access to the right resource at the right time for the right reason in support of, their mission objective. And that core of that starts with identifying who that right person is. And that does come from an authentication, but it is far more than just my presenting a credential. It's really understanding the digital identity of that user, and part of that is going to be contextual based. And so what we do with Ping Identity is we really rely upon certain things, like we might go out to a directory like Radiant Logic and pull in attributes and information about a user as we start to identify who that user is. But we also need to identify how that user is interacting with the system. All of these elements together, all of these context, attributes working together, then give us a better understanding of who this digital identity is at that time and what they're attempting to access, and then we make the decisions. So that's what we talk about when we talk about access management. So where does this start? Typically, in the authentication, we have to have the user prove who they are, and that typically falls within multi-factor authentication. But as we know, not all MFA is made equal, right? So more and more we're hearing about, verifier impersonation resistant or phishing resistant authentication. Phishing resistant is far easier to say. This really talks to a multi-factor authenticator that has certain levels of cryptographic strength, but also a notion that the individual needs to be present at that workstation where they're attempting to log in through, and that there are cryptographic controls in binding to ensure that, which is really a long way of saying the credential can't just be something like it gives you a notification on the phone and you click approve, because I could do that on my couch watching Netflix. And really what that is someone else attempting to log in. I use that as an example because that is a real world breach that occurred, right? Like someone got a notification on the phone, they clicked approve, and the attacker who had phished their username and password was able to log in as them. When asked afterwards, hey, why did you click approve? They simply said, well, that's what they told us to do. So we need to have something where there is that intent to log in. Now, how do we make this work, and why didn't this work for derived credentials? That had to do with federation and the lack thereof. So traditionally in the past, it was always let's log into each individual application. Each application is responsible for doing authentication. Not all authentication methods are supported, or I can only enable one authentication method per application. Some applications don't have the ability to dynamically allow you to bring different authenticators. So what ended up happening is that we had to, old school term, PK enable each individual application to work with PKI and smart cards, PIV and CAC, which are kind of the gold standard for phishing resistant authenticators, right? Now we're in that realm for FIDO, another option for phishing resistant authenticator, having to enable each individual application. So instead, what we are seeing, we saw this in FIPS 2013 that was released back in January of, I want to say 23, what we see is, hey, don't authenticate directly to the application. Instead, pull that back a layer and authenticate through a federation protocol. And that is going to allow me to do a number of things. One, good aggregation of logging, all of my authentications occurring through this kind of centralized application. That gives me quality logs that I can examine. But also, that's going to allow me to have a lot more extensibility. I can have a bunch of different authenticators that I can leverage. I can have a bunch of other systems I can bring in. Maybe I want to bring in an MDM as part of my examination. Maybe I need a risk score, so I'm going to go out to an XDR. I even have a technology partner who can tell me what the chipset is on the motherboard and bring that into an authentication workflow. So now I can make the decision based upon the hardware that user is using to leverage, right? I can't code those into all my applications, but I can do that through a centralized federation engine. And now I can use that to the different protocols to go out. Does it need to be header-based authentication? Does it need to be WS-Fed? Does it need to be SAML? Does it need to be OIDC? And I can do all that and have that flexibility, and that allows me to scale this authentication across my organization. You can go to the next slide. So as I hinted at, really the power of centralizing this authentication is in the adaptive authentication. So adaptive authentication really talks to bringing in elements that allow you to examine the riskiness of this specific authentication request. And actually this gets extended into authorization, because really authentication, That's setting us up to enable us for authorization decisions where we get even more fine-grained. This allows me to go out and take a look at all of these different elements and then have dynamic orchestrated pathways. Okay, so the user is not coming in from a PIV card, they're coming in from a FIDO. Okay, so maybe if they're coming in from FIDO, I need to look at this and then I'll make this decision. You get that idea where now I can change what I'm prompting the user for based upon what I'm discovering during the authentication. The other thing that this allows us to do, especially when we do it from a centralized perspective, is if at any point we need to adapt because a new risk has occurred, I don't have to go out to every application and make that change. It's, where I get passionate towards this is, okay, if I only have 10 applications, that's easy to do, but that's not a normal organization. Normal organization is going to have hundreds or thousands of applications. If I have to go out and make a policy change across each one, I'm never going to be able to keep up with modern threats. We have to be faster. And that's what we can do when we incorporate in these orchestrated engines into that flexibility within that federation session. So I think that's it for me. I think I'm turning it back to you, Matt.
All right, so if Peyton, you can throw up our second poll question for the day, thank you. So how does Uber Ethereum's IAM Advantage address the trade-off between security and usability? Those that have been following the Q&A, Paul had asked a question about highly regulated industries. And yes, there are obviously very much highly regulated parts of the federal government customer bases, but there's also a lot of pieces where usability is sometimes prioritized, just depending on the citizens and type of citizens we're interfacing with. So I might have just given away the answer, but I will turn it back over to James, let him work through his discussion points on privileged access management, and then we'll review the answers.
All right, yeah, thanks, Matt. And I do want to thank you and the team for bringing us together. And CyberArk is very proud to be part of this technology stack. So who is CyberArk? We created the privileged access management space. So when we were talking about that deep-rooted knowledge here in this group, CyberArk did start as a company 24 years ago, just doing privileged access management. We've evolved out of that. I'll be talking specifically about privileged access management today. And I also wanted to emphasize the fact that this technology stack that we're presenting to everybody today is tried and true, deployed today, throughout the DoD and federal government, and bringing tremendous value to customers. This is just a formalization and a SaaS offering of that same technology stack that's bringing value today, and it's protecting some of the most critical missions today in the U.S. government and DoD. So why privileged access management? Why is it part of the stack? A couple of reasons. One, we like to think that you want to start your baseline in terms of how you do your identity security program around privileged access management. Think of the keys to the kingdom, your critical assets, your high value asset unit, admins that are administrating those high value assets. You want to have a privileged access management program around that. And PAM is called out for in the various zero trust architectures. So within DoD, it's PAM is called out, and CyberArk itself is called out in several different reference architectures as a privileged access management solution. So that's why we're here. And I'll offer that really it's not an option in today. We've talked about the threats as the various teammates here have talked about their solutions. Our adversaries are innovating and going after identities and moving vertically. We like to say either laterally or vertically with identity. And almost every single one now attacks involve some sort of identity. So the ability to have a strong identity program is a major factor in protecting U.S. government and the DoD and getting those missions done, like we mentioned. So I'll also, before I go into the slide here, one more point to emphasize is that traditionally you might have thought of your identity access management system or program as siloed and really just meeting your protect function. So a lot of you have already adopted the national security, NIST's cybersecurity framework where you've identified those assets that you want to protect, and then you're protecting them with your IAM program. If you haven't realized, in the presentations before this, and hopefully I'll emphasize that here, that a modern identity and access management program really helps you in further on, whether it's in the detect phase, in the response phase, and the recovery phases. And we could talk through that later on. All right, so here, for privileged access management in the Uber Ether solution with the stack here, you can think of the vault as where we're going to store your secrets. So whether it's secrets for DevSecOps, whether it's privileged credentials for those admins, and we are using the automation and the presentation from Radiant Logic and Ping and SailPoint to make these decisions. I think that's the other big point here, is that we've got to really get our privileged access around our humans identified and then stored, protected, because you can't protect all your identities to the same fashion, and you can't afford to. So you put them in the vault as a best practice. And I'll also mention here that it was alluded to earlier, we've got to get the human identities under control, because we've just recently released a report from CyberArk that normally in an organization, you've got 45 machine identities for every one human identity you have. So again, start around, use the stack to help you with your human identities, and then move on to those machine identities, again, for a further discussion. So here in the vault, we have a session manager. And what does that mean? We heard about policies and enforcing policies. So that session manager is going to help you enforce those policy decisions. So, do you want somebody having access to it from only an internal device, from internal your network, or maybe you're allowing it from mobile devices? All those types of things can be enforced. And that session manager also, an important fact here, is making sure that that individual is connecting to the vault with a secure web browser, and that the identity never really lands on that endpoint. So again, whether it's a mobile device, your laptop, or your desktop at work. And that's very important, again, for the minor attacker, because we like to say we are de-privileging the attacker, because often the attackers are going to land on a box, whether it's phishing or some other method, and then they're going to collect credentials. Well, if you never had a privileged credential on that machine, then the attacker's never going to be able to catch that and use that to, again, move laterally or move vertically within the network. So that's, we have the session vault, the session manager. We also are running privileged threat analytics. So again, we're feeding both the other tools that you've mentioned, and we're feeding your security, your SIEM tools, some analytics, so you can do that. And again, you go into responding and recovering if you have an incident there. And then we also have web access management that allows you to manage the vault and also use the passwords from the vault. So I think that's all I really wanted to cover. I'm looking forward to the questions, Matt, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah. James, just prep. We'll have a question at the end. I just marked it came in from Paul as well as one from Rick. So that means I can't talk the entire rest of the time like I like to. And I'm going to have you guys hold me accountable to make sure we've got some room to answer these up. So back to the second question we asked. Sorry, I got to pull that guy back up. Thank you, Peyton. You are saving my tush today. So yeah, everyone understands this one too. One of the major benefits of the platform we've put together, right? This team has built up to the IC levels, the enclaves within the IC, multi-level, multi-domain. Frank and I used to work together on the Oracle cross-domain databases, writing JDBC driver updates, pulling the user from the browser all the way through the containers, all the way down to multi-level data labels. It's been quite interesting, and welcome both of my labs that decided to just break into the office. Sorry about that, everyone. But the benefit of this being a private tenant solution is that you can tailor as to exactly what capabilities, what features, and dial up and dial down, depending on your use cases and the applications you're protecting, how to balance usability versus security, and even within the same private tenant, just depending on the applications and missions you're driving. So with that, I will continue. So we've walked through a lot of it of how all these pieces come together to build up a full IAM stack to, as Frank said, make access decisions, making sure that people get access to the right data at the right time. And so one of the questions is, why Uber Eats, right? Why this small business that's been around for 12 years, making a lot of noise probably because, well, I'm typically known as a big mouth in many of these discussions, but why these large, literally billion-dollar companies trusted us to bring this to market and provide their shared solution. So just a quick background on us. We've been doing this for almost 13 plus years at this point. Before that, many of our team members were building across the intelligence community, Department of Defense, Homeland Security, Treasury, and I collected some of the biggest badasses I know to build a company that is extremely focused and extremely dedicated to solving these problems. Right, we're quite a growing company right now as we've started to roll out this platform, but you can look back all the way to 2011. Right, we were chief architects for identity at the NRO. We deployed full identity stacks, which was I'm running through my head. 3/4 of the solutions that we have today as part of IAM Advantage to more than half a dozen ground stations. Sorry, that's a number. But at each one of those, you had RHEL with the Five Eyes partner releasability. You had no foreign releasability, over 400 stories global, or 400 servers globally that were managed on many different infrastructures managed by many different teams, which forced us to focus on automation, configuration management very, very early on. And at NRO, we were their first application into C2S because they had a leadership team that understood, hey, we can't put an application into this new cloud platform. Right, I'm laughing at myself, right? 13 years later, this new cloud platform, without having identity locked down and done well there first. So that moved us into DHS HISN, which, if you're not aware, stores things like the terrorist threat list directly on the internet for federated global partners with hundreds of thousands of people that have access to that and other data. Every year, when the Super Bowl spins up, we bring in the people from each one of the different organizations, or the stadium, the local police departments, and coordinate all the threats that may be coming into that, and making sure that if something does happen, we have the people available to collaborate globally. A lot of times these towns that these big events happen in don't have the same training and capabilities like a New York City or an LA, but we bring their departments in to help virtually online to solve this. It was DHS's first FISMA High implementation. At the same time, that was the external facing identity at DHS headquarters. We built the internal, which became the master user record for CDM, worked with Frank and Ross Ford and a bunch of others on that very early on. That became that standard across all of the CDM agencies and now has grown over into the DoD. At that point, we were doing automated nightly deployments with SailPoint, able to run multiple applications, going through the dev processes at a time, distributing that out to any team that wanted to contribute. They didn't have to wait for us to get them to the top of the queue to work with them. It really started to hum. And then took that and built out DHS's Cloud Factory 2, migrating 400 applications. Identity Partner of the Year with Exabeam for integrating all of the threat analytics, all of the telemetry we see in this platform today, sending that to the SIEM, seeing the alerts, doing 360 reviews, doing ad hoc certifications if users have behaviors that are out of their norm, but not far enough that the SOC needs to jump in and look at it. And then over the last 3 years, building out across the DoD with millions of users to do lifecycle management, dynamic group management, continuing to extend on that ability to have very large organizations with those thousands of applications federate out the development and integration to the ICAM platforms through the standards-based interfaces and the automations we've built, to really make this that something that can be adopted at that level of scale very, very, very quickly. And then most recently, just to show you kind of the power of this platform as it's come together in Air Force's Pathfinder. So they signed a contract. We had the full infrastructure built with all of these components for them to support the entire Air Force workload in a day. The second day, when we showed them that everything was up and online, they connected us through to their production data sources, and we were loading data. By the end of the first week, we were doing full joiner, mover, leaver life cycles against their production data. I will not say that we were sending that directly to their ADs, but we were sending it to a mock email server that showed them exactly the events that were happening. So we could run that for a few weeks to validate, here's what would happen. In those 3 weeks, we found lots of data quality problems and lots of pieces where we showed that the workflows we bring out of the box drills down to those second and third tiers of use cases. So we might be small, but we've got a hell of a pedigree. And that's kind of why we became the trusted partner to build this with the very large vendors you see here today. So what is it? In general, simplified, automated, integrated identity platform. It is certified at FedRAMP High, DoD Impact Level 5. So if you need a moderate, if you need a high, if you need an Impact 4, if you need an Impact 5, we've got you. Each one of these is private tenant, where each customer has their own customer controlled keys. So when we see some of the hacks we've seen in the last couple of weeks, where keys were leaked and other nation states were able to gain access to emails from any agency where those keys were signed because it was shared across the platform, that won't happen with us. That can't happen with us. Everything we do is open visibility. Every audit record, every log, every access from your teams, our teams, when pushes happen, where those pushes came from, full SBOMs with the pipelines, full accreditation that the containers are coming from our signed factory. You see all of it. We don't hide anything. Securities and identity is too much of a risk to screw around with anymore. So we know we're a small team. We know we have highly focused on the logs that we generate and built the alerts that we know and have seen as indicators of compromise within these platforms, highly, highly targeted. But we also know that your SOC teams have correlation capabilities that well outpace what we're able to do today. So we give you access to everything that happens within your tenant to be able to see and make those calls, something that I don't believe any other vendor provides today. As I said, pre-integrated. So not only are we aggregating the data through Radiant, pulling that data into SailPoint, right? Pushing out if you're a contractor and you've got the DBA role on that contract, making sure you automatically get access to the DBA labeled vaults inside of CyberArk. At the same time, if you have federated access coming in from another agency, coming in from another partner, we immediately push that data that comes in their assertion, comes from the other agency or the other company's data, put that in Radiant so all of the internal applications can use it. Push that message with that data into SailPoint. So we're not waiting for a cron job to execute in 15 minutes, 2 hours, and tell people, hey, thanks for showing up. Come back in 2 hours when we've got access. We're doing this real time. Same way we're integrating that when that risk score starts changing, we tell SailPoint that, or I'm sorry, we tell Ping that, hey, this is looking risky. If they are only at an AAL2 authenticator, we want you to step them up to AAL3. Right? And with that comes our component libraries that have policies and procedures built to the federal best practices, and not only our collective expertise as a team, but also the collective expertise of these vendors. So I'm going to speed through because we're running out of time here. As always, I talk too much because I'm way too passionate about this platform. And
Yeah,
um,
and actually, Matt, we might be able to answer one of the questions real quickly about
go for it.
that pre-integration. So there's a question in here, and there's actually two questions that are very similar. So there's a question from Rick O'Donnell where he was really asking, one was the zero trust mapping, PDPs, PAPs, PIPs, PEPs. The annoying answer to that is the same components within the solution are PDPs and PEPs or PAPs. The reality is, and this is why I've never necessarily liked always going back to that one particular diagram in 800-207, is it makes it seem like there's only one of each. But the reality is, depending upon the workflow and what you're doing, the engines may react differently. But absolutely, there is a policy decision engine. That policy decision engine in certain cases may be actually in the governance engine of SailPoint. Sometimes it's absolutely within Ping Identity, and true for policy enforcement, right? CyberArk is doing that a lot from a privileged access management standpoint. Ping Identity is doing that as well, depending upon what we're doing, if we're doing dynamic authorization capabilities. But the point I really wanted to answer in that question was the second part, and it was really talking about wanting to have dynamic ABAC systems powered in, but that rarely seems common in practice, and that's absolutely true. The reason why we don't see that very common in practice is because that's really hard to do from any one single solution. Instead, what you really have to understand is in order to do ABAC well, attribute-based access control, you need to have multiple things integrated. So this is where, and I'll speak real high level, right? You know, there are a lot of us on here who could go into each of the individual components, but in order to do attribute-based access control, what's the first thing that you need? Attributes. Where are you getting those attributes? Identity governance engines. Identity governance engines that have been built by an entire company, that is their focus, that is their mission, like a SailPoint, right? They do that extraordinarily well. Frank could talk about all the different ways that they can, generate those and power those and make it a lot simpler from an administrative standpoint. Then you have to be able to aggregate those attributes from across the enterprise, store those attributes, make them available, right? And that's where our friends at Radiant, that's what they do within their directory structure. And those attributes sometimes by necessity aren't in any one place. Those might be purposefully have to be pulled from multiple different systems. And that's what we do at Ping, is where we can go out and say, yeah, let's take a look at all the different data points where those attributes may come from. And some of those attributes aren't in a persistent storage state. Now, we don't require any enrollment of a user. We don't require persistent storage, right? Persistent means it's stored in a directory, it's stored long-term. Instead, some of those are contextual. What MFA did you come in from? What device did you come in from? Et cetera, et cetera.
All right, Brian,
now,
I'm going to cut you because we have to get the third polling question to make sure everyone gets their CPEs here. So Peyton, if you could pop that up for us. Which of the following systems can we integrate with? And this plays exactly into what you were saying, Brian. AD, LDAP, cloud service providers like AWS, or all the above and 250 more. And obviously the answer is going to be the last one. The platform has, and this is some of the challenges of some of the other providers, all of the connectors for all of these solutions. We are standards based in the way we take this out. So something like Radiant Logic has access via web services, SCIM, which is the identity standards interface. We've got, see, I just let everyone cheat. I'm terrible. Hopefully they never audit our question and answer. But right, we've got SQL interfaces all built on top of the Radiant Logic solution. So whatever apps, whatever capabilities, because as Brian said, the PDP PEP problem is hard because we've got 20 years of code of application developers embedding that in. As Brian said, a lot of pieces have to come together to do that. And we've done some orchestration work with the machine-to-machine side, integration with Kubernetes to actually remove some of that from within the applications and doing that at the ingress points, or if you're using something like Spiffy, the machine-to-machine side to make that happen. So Brian's going to type some answers inside of here. Thank you guys for playing catch up. If we don't get to the Q&A, all the answers, we will send answers with the Caresoft team after this. So just real quick, as we're wrapping up here, with the traditional approach, we see 12 to 18 months bringing these things together with individual teams that are learning how to install, configure, integrate, really on the government's time. And our goal is to bring this into, right, we're not going to lie and say we're going to get an authorization within an agency within 2 days, because even though FedRAMP promises, we're not quite there yet as a community, but we are absolutely seeing these components up, integrated, loading data in weeks, not months, not years, ready to roll. And a lot of that comes because of some of these capabilities we've built. So we'll send out these slides, but I really want to show, right, not only do we have all of these workflow processes, all of these integration processes, the attribute-driven access requests. So you go to Ping to go access an application. Well, if you've got the attributes in place, you don't even need to make a request. That's a policy decision point that you don't have to go back into SailPoint and manually do it. But you might get into that app and get to one page that requires you to up level, right? And we've got the hooks to drive you back to that point in SailPoint to get access to that thing. Additionally, we've got master user record models for all of these things on the left-hand side. So all of our common ones within the CDM world, but also risk, system boundaries, trust. So as we're moving out to more NPE capabilities, how we aggregate not only the person side, but also the non-person sides together. And these models are proven at scale in large organizations like Google and Cisco that we've brought together as the best of breeds. And every one of those sources, we give you as an agency, here's the type of data we're looking for. Here's what we use that data for. So for contracts, we're looking for contract numbers. We're looking for that contract start date and end date. We're looking for the contracting officer and the contracting officer rep. But not only that, yeah, go ahead and launch it, Peyton. I'm sorry. I thought we were launching as we were going already. But right, not only that, we have the use cases built. We don't show up with an empty notebook and spend 6 to 12 months saying, let's draw pretty pictures together of your business and have executives fight. We say, here's 60 to 80%. Here's the things we're trying to solve. And then each one of those, we not only built the happy path for a contractor joining the organization where, oh, they've got a manager gives us a start date, we're going to provision and activate their accounts. We're also building the negative paths. So what if we have an active contractor and they're not on a contract? Well, we've got the reports that go out daily to your ERP systems that says, hey, where should this person be? Maybe they've been in adjudication for months and their contract ended, but now they're greenlit. What do we do with them? Or, hey, and about 20% of the contracts we see, this is the problem of we have a core, we have a CO assigned, but guess what? They don't work here anymore, or they're not active, or they're on maternity leave. How do we fix that data? Because if you don't, you're stuck in approval queues, right? All of these things are built in out of the box from day one. And if you tell me you've got 2 places to send contracts based on the contract number, right? That's a simple if statement. That's a simple change that gets you to the 100% rather than starting with the blank pages. So on top of that, we add program planning with our templates, our best practices, the vendor's best practices of how do you do privileged onboarding? How do you do code management? The whole platform is available as a Docker build so that any developer in your organization can take your current master user record view, the baselines with templated data, and build it against their code. And when they're ready, merge it back in. And then you can federate that across your organization. You don't have to have our teams doing the integration. You can bring your own integrators. You can push that out and move at the speed you have to, right? There's no more, oh, we'll get you in 6 months. It's here's the interfaces, here's the Docker builds. You can get it yourself and send it to us. And again, my biggest thing here is this is private tenant. You control the encryption keys to every piece of data in your environment. You control exactly who that gets shared to, which should only be us. And then if you decide you want to leave, you can blow that away and the data is useless. And with that, it's also zero lock-in. We've spent, right, a lot of money, a lot of dedicated team members over the last 2 years a lot of lines of code over the last 10 years, bulletproofing this, testing this, the positive cases, the negative cases. The code's not the first time it's run for you. It's been tested. But at the same time, if you decide Uber Eats is not the place for you, nothing we build, nothing at all is proprietary. You can take that back, run it with your own providers, run it on premises, run it in a different cloud away from the Uber Eats management plane. That's your choice. That's what we owe our customers. And we will forever stand by that. Again, I'm passionate about security and identity, and lock-in's bullshit. I'll just leave it at that. And then the other benefit is the way we've built this system gives you, as federal government customers, an ability to share. And share across, hey, we know this other agency just did a big SAP integration, a big ServiceNow integration. We'll introduce you all, and you can share that code for that integration so that you're not getting charged 10 and 12 different times by different integrators for the same lines of code. Let's just go get this done together. So again, we're sorry. We know it's been 20 years. We've all been solving this, but together, I think we've got a very, very special solution to finally get this across the finish line and really help all of the agencies and everyone who supports them hit that first pillar of zero trust and get off to the most solid and secure start we can have. So with that, I'll open it up for questions. I know we're 3 minutes after. I've screamed into a microphone a lot. So if you got anything, we'll listen. Thank you, Brian, for keeping up with the questions and the rest of the team as I screamed. But thank you.
Thanks again to all of our speakers for your participation. We do want to thank all of our participants for joining us today, and we do hope that you found this webcast informative and helpful to you and your organization. If you wouldn't mind to take a moment, answer those questions that will appear in your browser after the webinar. We do really appreciate the feedback. And then for those that met the CPE requirements today, you'll receive your certificate of completion within 2 weeks. I'm going to go ahead and share our contact information. Again, if you do have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out and request more information. Our contact information is being displayed here, so please don't hesitate to call or email us. Finally, in the next day or so, we've got a few people chiming in on if these slides will be sent out. We'll get them sent out. We'll get a recording sent out to everyone as well, so you can all view it again or share it with a colleague. Thank you all for attending.